Thank you very much, Andrea, and thank you to the European Champions Alliance for the invitation. It's a pleasure to present today what has been going on in the Brussels bubble for the last few months, which is some very important legislative initiatives and some very important political changes towards competitiveness, innovation, and how this could impact the next European Commission and the way forwards in policies. So as you might have seen, two reports came out in the European Union recently, and there's a new European Commission. And all these things are going to pave the way for more legislative changes in the next month, some of which will be quite important for the European level. So on that note, I'll start by giving you kind of a wider context on the policy situation in Europe before dipping into the reports and the policy changes that we might see, which might impact entrepreneurs, VC funds, and startups all over Europe. So first of all, you might have seen it, but there's quite an interesting context around Europe right now with a wider debate about a loss of competitiveness in Europe. There's a true sense of it that arose at the end of 2023, at the beginning of 2024, in the newspaper, in the global policy discourses, which was at the same time kind of accelerated by the United States signing their Inflation Reduction Act, which you can see on the photo here. The IRA, which was quite well thought about in the sense that it gives company incentives to innovate, to build, especially in the clean technology sectors within the US. And so at the same time, you have in Europe kind of protests about the fact that we do not innovate enough, that we lose in competitiveness, but there was not much that could be done in the European political level. You had at the same time the end of a European Commission term, the first one of von der Leyen, which ended at the end of the summer, I'd say in June 2024. So you couldn't have any policy initiative being done. And at the same time, at the national level, you had countries like France, Germany, or Italy, which are not in a great political state, I'd say. In France, there's wider debate about the coalition right now. It's handled by the president. Same thing in Germany, and in Italy, you have also a government that's under scrutiny. So not a lot of national reactions towards the US IRA, which attracts a lot of European companies. And same thing also in China, where you had a kind of a strong push for competitiveness that the EU didn't have. So you have a strong US and China push for wider economic plans. And at the same time, the EU is not doing much because of the political landscape. So that's why the European Commission, especially the President Ursula von der Leyen, ordered two reports to be done that would pave the way to new reforms in the fall of 2024. These two reports were ordered to two former high-level diplomats. So you have Enrico Letta on one hand, who is the former European Commissioner, and Mario Draghi, the former President of the European Central Bank, were both Italians and both worked for the entirety of 2024 on these famous reports. And so the first one, which is much more than a market by Enrico Letta, came in April, and the second one in October, The Future of European Competitiveness by Mario Draghi. The one that came early in the summer was very interesting. The second one is the one that made most headlines. It was pushed back multiple times, but came out basically the week where the new European commissioners were appointed. So as a way to kind of pave the way for their future reforms. Both reports are quite painting a gloomy picture of the European economy. If Europe basically does not move swiftly, it'll be forced to die in a slow agony, to quote Mario Draghi, which is partly vocal on Europe's chances. Basically, both reports kind of states that the entire European Union is built on a model that is crumbling. It's a model of international free trade, of safe energy supplies that kind of dried down during the Russian occupation of Ukraine, and a stable geopolitical order. All of these sectors that the EU was built upon are slowly crumbling. And at the same time, the EU didn't really take the chances to leverage technological changes as an advantage, such as AI or the internet. So therefore, you have growth that is on one hand is not assured, and also you have multiple challenges that are coming in front of the EU. Europe is losing 2 million workers per year until 2040. That's the statement by Mario Draghi. The double green and digital transition need higher and deeper investment plans than the Marshall Plan after the Second World War. So a huge amount of money are needed. And at the same time, member states are not too keen on spending more money right now. And so if Europe cannot afford to offer its citizens the model on which it's built, which is, sustainability, democracy, international independence, a very strong social model that is praised by the Mario Draghi report, well, Europe doesn't have a reason to exist anymore. So there's a clear sense of urgency that came out with these reports. I'll come to that in a second, but just what they concretely ask for. Well, there are viable solutions in these reports, but they're better seen as a collection of diagnoses and attempts to answer them than in-depth proposal that the European Commission could just pick. They're also a compilation of industry sectors' demands. So if you look, both reports have, for example, pages on the pharmaceutical sectors or on the telecom sector. Well, if you look in depth, it's basically the demands that the industry have been asking for a while. It's good because that means they probably, engaged a lot with industry representatives, but at the same time, there's not brand new ideas that were never thought before, I would say. It's also there have been a lot of dialogues with researchers when they put these reports. So you can find some academic solutions that are now maybe pushed into the more political spheres. And so I'll go into the startup ecosystem in a minute, but just a quick overview. It's clear that the two reports ask for instruments to unleash the potential of the single market to boost European competitiveness. Basically, our market is the same size as the US, but we cannot make it thrive as the United States do. So the Letta report really pinned down the need to scale, scaling the companies, creating European champions, saying that companies, citizens, investors are still facing barriers in the 27 member states. He took some concrete example, like the train sector, the finance sector, energy, telecommunication, to say that we should streamline bureaucratic burden in order to create continental-sized companies that could actually compete with American or Chinese ones. The Draghi report, on the other hand, he created more headlines. It was inspired by the Letta report and then deepened some of his observations to focus on the global competitiveness. It took a lot of comparison with China and the US and stressed the importance of bridging the gap in some key strategic sectors such as AI, quantum, energy, and called member states to have a drastic change of thought when it comes to investments. If you had read the news in the past weeks, you might have seen the number that made the headlines, which was Draghi proposing 800 billion euros of further investments with an additional 450 millions just for the clean transition. It's quite a lot of big numbers to put forward for Mario Draghi. And so what about this startup ecosystem? I'm going to focus on three kind of proposals that are set up in the two reports. The first one is the idea of scaling in Europe efficiently. For instance, in the Letta report, you find a proposal for a 28th regime of company, which is a proposition that was set up by Letta, which is basically having a European status of company. So you have one already existing called Sociedades Europeas, but it's only for big multinationals. And the idea would be that a startup or scale-up, for instance, could have a European status that would mean he could expand throughout the single market quite easily. We met him at France Digital. We met Enrico Letta in January to actually talk about this idea, which is he was quite optimistic about it. It's in his report. And it would allow Europe to create more continental champion. It's not a new idea. It's part of a larger coalition of lawyers which have been asking for a European code of business law for a while. But this 28th regime could create European champions that could mean there wouldn't be in a competitive level with Chinese and US companies who benefit from larger domestic market, which European companies don't, because the single market is too fragmented. The idea is also followed by other measures to simplify activities in the European Union. So you have a passport for certification, for instance, for certain areas, and a push for further harmonization as specific field like the GDPR. The second point for which I'd like to have your attention is what we used to call the Capital Markets Union, CMU, but which both reports are now referring to the Saving and Investment Union. Globally, it's the need to better integrate our financial markets in Europe for example, in the investment sectors, the listing possibilities or companies, the banking union, the participation of institutional investors into VC funding. That's the saving and investment union. For both Letta and Draghi, the saving and investment union is a capital way to mobilize basically the private capital that we have in Europe, especially the savings, to further invest in Europe's innovation. It's a massive pool of money that is quite unused right now, and on the other hand, our companies basically are taking funding from outside of Europe, which means that when they go as an exit or in an IPO, the money goes back to American retirees and not European one, which is kind of a lack of European coherence, I'd say. So in order to increase the efficient allocation of European savings, Mario Draghi proposes a European long-term product that could be used for the growth of new European technologies. There's also the idea that institutional investors, such as insurers or pension funds, could take greater risk when they invest in European economy, especially in venture capital, to create players that would meet the financial needs that is needed right now, for example, in biotech, in AI, or in clean tech. Letta also mentions a bit more the SMEs. He refers to the fact that we need an IPO market in Europe that's thriving because European companies are just enlisting in the NASDAQ. And both also mentioned the need for financial literacy in the population, which is kind of lagging behind the one of the US, for instance. And the third point, which is quite key for me, because it's not a point that pleases everyone in the EU bubble, for instance, member states, it's the idea of new mechanisms for a European competitiveness fund, or just in general, more European public spending. These points can be found in both reports. So Letta asked for European sovereignty funds, for instance, which is a measure that had been envisaged by Ursula von der Leyen before member states kind of killed it, saying they didn't want further spending. And Mario Draghi also asked for a European competitiveness fund. He has to change kind of the way the EU economy is thought of today. He wants, for example, to rethink public procurement rules, which in Europe is very much on the basis to the cheapest offer wins, to kind of rethink their role in a more protectionist way, although the word protectionist is not referred to, but to make it a bit more sovereign, to create jobs in Europe, all of these little criteria that could enhance public procurement to help the European innovation economy. He also asked Europe to focus its effort on two specific gaps that he identifies in the funding chain. For example, the innovation gap, when a startup goes from the research lab to commercialization, and the support for scaling critical industries such as semiconductors, pharma, clean energy, all of these innovative branches of the EU economy. What's interesting with the Draghi report is also that he's not afraid to say that in some sectors, the EU is already too far and should maybe cut the spending, the R&D spending. So, for example, he refers to the solar industry to say that, China and the US have such an advantage that spending more money in R&D, more public money on the solar panels in Europe, it's maybe not worth it. And maybe the EU should focus where it has an advantage. There's clean technologies, quantum, AI, applications, all of these things. And this leads to the new European Commission. If you followed a bit the policy news recently, you've seen that in June there was a new European Parliament elected. Then the president of the Commission, von der Leyen, was accepted for a second mandate at the head of the Commission, and member states there proposed commissioners. Now we have a new commission that is currently, they were designated by member states, and they will, at the beginning of November, pass this audition in front of the European Parliament to confirm their designation. So this is the new European Commission. It's a bit tricky to understand. Basically, on the top, you have Ursula von der Leyen, who's the president of the Commission. And then you can see all around is the vice presidents, the ones that are carrying, as a bigger portfolio of policy area. And then you'd have the normal commissioners who are in the middle. We're going to look at some of them to see how maybe the Draghi and Letta reports are reported in their policy portfolio. And the first one I want you to take attention is Teresa Ribera on the upper left corner of the slide. Teresa Ribera is a former minister of Spain for the green transition. And now she's the Vice President of the Commission on Clean, Just, and Competitive Transition. So she has a double, let's say, role. One is to ensure that the green transition goes through, but also to change the competition policy of the European Union. And that's quite an interesting topic, because competition policy is a big trend in the European Union. It's one of the key role of the Commission, is you've seen it, but when it comes to the Digital Markets Act, for instance, when it comes to competitive cases, the Commission has a huge power there. And Ursula von der Leyen asked Teresa Ribera to kind of review the merger control guidelines of the Commission, and notably to work on killer acquisition, which is quite a big trend for startups and scale-ups. Then you'll have another commissioner that's going to be quite interesting, is the French one, Stéphane Séjourné, just here, who will be the executive president for prosperity and industrial strategy. So he'll be focusing more on the economic and industrial role, but for example, for scale-ups working in clean technology, he's supposedly in the first 100 days of his mandate, he will present a clean industrial deal to focus on investment, scaling, and competitiveness of the clean industrial ecosystem of Europe. So it's going to be quite interesting to follow through with also a new industrial strategy in general. He's going to work also on single market barriers. So the fact that it's too complicated still to scale in the single market, he's going to be working on that. And also on the public procurement rules that I was talking about, trying to modernize public procurement to make it more efficient to support European innovation. So that's something that we will definitely keep an eye on. And then the third vice president, which is quite interesting, is on the upper right here. She's Elina Virkkunen, the Finnish commissioner, will be vice president for tech sovereignty, security, and democracy. So it's quite interesting, first of all, to see that tech and sovereignty are referred to together in the official title. She'll be working on AI innovation, for instance. She is due to implement the AI factories, which is basically legislation to help startups and scale-ups to use high-performance computer to develop. She'll be also working on the EU Cloud and AI Development Act to increase the computational capacity of AI startups. There's also a lot of things in quantum. She's supposedly presenting an EU quantum chips plan to help the quantum ecosystem of Europe. And she'll also be working on a Digital Fairness Act, which is a new tech regulation that will probably put some more rules on more ethical challenges that exist in the tech ecosystem. And then just quickly going through three commissioners. So these ones are not vice presidents, they're just classic commissioners. You have Maria Luisa Albuquerque, who's the Commissioner for Financial Services and Saving and Investment Union. So as we talked about, she'll be the one reviewing, how we can make European savings and investment more interesting for startups, and also to ensure that the IPO market in Europe becomes a bit more attractive. You have Michael McGrath here, who will be the Irish Commissioner in charge of justice, and he'll be the one also handling the work on the 28th regime I was referring a bit earlier. That'd be quite interesting to see how we can grow European tech champions. And the final one that I wanted to mention is Ekaterina Zaharieva. She's a Bulgarian Commissioner for Research, Innovation, and Startups. Usually startups didn't have a commissioner, now they have one. Still unsure what her legislative power will be, but she's supposed to draw a strategy on startups and scale-up, and also Innovation Act to kind of ease how innovation is made in Europe. That's all for the European Commission, and that's all for me. I'll let you with the view of Mario Draghi and Enrico Letta, the two architects of this new European Union. Don't hesitate if you have a question, and thank you, Andrea. I'll leave you the mic.